Welcome to The Investor, a podcast where I, Joel Palafinkel, your host, dives deep into the minds of the world's most influential institutional investors. In each episode, we sit down with an investor to hear about their journeys and how global markets are driving capital allocation. So join us on this journey as we explore these insights. All right, so we are live here with a new friend of mine, David Hampton. He's the founder of Hampton Strategies. Wanted to get, different types of people with different backgrounds on our podcast. We've had mostly people that work in the private equity industry, but one of the most important people are finance, private equity, venture capital recruiters. So, learning about how recruiters can be great partners alongside our search. A lot of times our search is going to be inbound and outbound. We're actively applying to roles, but also partnering with recruiters, how we can do that best, how we can build a long-term relationship with recruiters, and what to expect. So I think I think there's a lot of things to really unpack and go deep on. But I'm just going to give a quick overview. David Hampton is the founder of Hampton Strategies. They were founded back in 2017. They have a proprietary system and meticulous attention to detail, and they focus on connecting top talent to fulfill their clients' needs. Their hedge funds, family offices, private equity funds, private credit funds. He's a former private investigator. So I think that's a really great superpower, right? Finding the true background of the talent and making sure that, obviously what they're saying on their resume is legit. So I think just kind of some of those, soft skills that you've acquired doing that. I would love to learn about that experience because, I'll tell you this, there's a lot of family offices that hire private investigators for their due diligence, especially when they're about to do a deal. So they'll look up like somebody's their background, their criminal history. I actually knew a gatekeeper to a large family office that essentially just needed somebody's name and the state that they lived in, and they gave me like a long paragraph of like the background of this person. So there's a lot of cool tools out there, people that you can partner with to kind of just make sure that you find talent and retain talent. David also is an educator, a researcher, an adjunct professor, and he's got expertise in forensic psychology. And after providing psychological leadership profiles of Afghanistan's presidential candidates during his deployment with the U.S. Army forces, he transitioned into executive search, leveraging his principles of discipline, consciousness, and authenticity to deliver exceptional results for clients across various industries. And, Hampton Strategies, just a really quick overview, and David's going to go deeper. They embody the principles of grit, passion, dedication, commitment, discipline, and authenticity as they serve candidates and clients in the private equity and venture capital ecosystem. Also, they also support the wealth tech, investment, and asset management sectors, and also some fintech as well, which I serve some time as well. So excited to learn about the trends there. But David, welcome to the show. Hopefully that exhaustive intro was a good kickoff.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate that. That's I really appreciate it, man. How would you? Here's what I'm going to start off saying, like in terms of my career path, and I'll just say it in general. Career paths are not linear; they're not a straight line. And so I think my career path is a testament to that. And one of the wisest people I know said that was my wife. I was in between jobs. I've worked 3 different jobs at the same time, and so really it started back when versatility of trying to be in kind of like I've always enjoyed and learning about people, how people work, how people operate, that kind of thing. And then I've always enjoyed having a mastery of like linguistics. I'm bilingual. I've acquired some languages, some Italian, some Dari, and it's always kind of been a part of who I am. And so really that was like kind of the foundation of like why I set off into the path I went to. Curiosity has gotten me into those paths as well. And so, I started off majoring in psych and English. I wanted to use both degrees. In another world, I would have gone and worked for the New Orleans Police Department. Decided against it at that time. That was right before Katrina hit, a couple years before. So I think God was watching out for me. Ventured off to LA, which is where I was a private investigator after being turned away by the LAPD because of not the lie detector test, not the psych test. It was the fact that I had like some basketball injuries that prevented me from being able to run in boots. Again, I think God was looking out for me.
Sure.
I ventured back to Dallas, applying to grad school, and trying to figure out. I think at 22, 23, 24 years old, I call it the quarter life crisis that most people don't really talk about. And it's like, what do I do? Like, what, and no one really like helped prepare me for a career, like what I could do. There was teaching, and so when I was applying to grad school, my dad said, like, he's like, oh, that's great. I'm glad you're going to grad school. What if you don't get in? And that's I got a backup plan, I guess, of being a high school English teacher. I got accepted to NYU's program. I deferred it because I'd already accepted the job as the English teacher prior to that, and I was off. I coached basketball during that year. Went to NYU, studied forensic psychology. My plan was to actually get a PhD in clinical psychology. And again, I hadn't lost sight or of the idea of wanting to be a forensic psychologist. That's really what I wanted. I thought I wanted to be. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to, go from experience side and be a police officer. And then, I just figured I'll get the credentials and I'll do it that way.
Yeah.
Academia fell out of favor for me. Like I wasn't a fan of it. I found it to be too cutthroat, and just not my speed. And so I changed plans and shifted and met my wife, was teaching in New York to offset some costs for tuition. In that time, I applied to go work for West Point, defense contractor and research, performance optimization. Did that, and then I got transferred out to Naval Health Research Center in San Diego. Spent quite a bit of my career out there, and lived out there for about 15 years. There were some layoffs that occurred, and I was in transition. Found myself being deployed to Afghanistan. The experience kind of launched me into being ideal for that role, and I was gathering intelligence, as you mentioned. Like I was tasked with developing psychological leadership profiles of presidential candidates. That, I will say, there's a footnote with that. I wasn't allowed to go outside the wire, which means I wasn't allowed to go outside the base and talk to the actual candidates. It was too, as they say, kinetic or too dangerous. And so I had to figure out a method of doing it from a distance. And so that was done based on some research that I founded, and kind of, I actually reached out to two professors, one at Michigan and one at Syracuse, had some foundational research in doing that, applied their methodologies, and luckily, it went well. And came back, and again found myself kind of like, all right, what am I going to do? And so I was, during this time, I'd become friends with a buddy of mine, and the thing that got me thinking is, like, I saw him every single time I saw him, he was wearing a t-shirt, board shorts, flip-flops. Yeah. And I was like, dude, like, what do you do, man? Because I was like, because he's like so laid back, and he was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon coming, like just, ambling up, and he's like, I'm a headhunter. And I was like, I had no idea what that was. And I was like, what is that? He's like, I find people for jobs. He's like, it's not rocket science. It just takes like hard work and discipline and resilience. And the more and more he talked about it, and when I asked him about, kind of like, hey, what do the earnings look like? And he's like, 325 in a good year kind of thing. And with 3 kids, I was like, I could manage that. Like, and I was like, just how hard can it be? And so I basically called all the recruiting firms in San Diego, and I pitched them. I pitched them myself, and I knew why they wouldn't want to hire me. They were all caught off guard. They were all like, like, really? Like, do you have any sales experience? No. Do you have any recruiting experience? No. Like, why do you want to do this? And I was prepared for that. And I got about six interviews. I got 1 job offer, and I took it, and I excelled at it, and I loved it. I loved it, Joel. Like, I really, really enjoy what I do. I still love it, still in love with it. There's something about, people may say recruiting is like selling or sales, that kind of thing. And I'm like, there's nothing like manifesting something that's going to be better, like life-changing for somebody else. Like that to me is like all those things that God prevented me from doing led me to what I'm doing today. And there's nothing like it. And I truly believe that I do God's work. Like he works through me in this regard, because what I'm trying to do is just is improve the person's life with whom I come in touch. That's really what I'm trying to do, is like have them be better off.
So David, not to pivot from you to Will Smith, whatever anybody has to say about Will Smith, but Will Smith, I saw something in my feed about a year ago. This is before the slap. But essentially, Will was like, look, I've had everything since I was in my 20s, right? I'd take all my homies from Philly shopping, and we go to the Gucci store, and, I had Lamborghinis and everything, but, I still felt empty, because it's like lonely at the top, but like, he felt the most happiest, essentially when he was helping people. So I think, that really, at the end of the day, when you're, let's say you work in private equity, you're working in venture, if you're screwing a bunch of people over, there's only, the money that you earn, tricking people or whatever is only going to get you so far. But if you're creating impact, if you're investing in impactful ventures that's making the world a better place, if you're investing in AI that's, removing, half of the friction for a workflow, then I feel like there's huge fulfillment as, as a human being. I think that's what it is. And I think with the career journey, I think a lot of people in my audience, feel the same way. I mean, they've gotten into their current role oftentimes through non-traditional pathways, right? You think you have to go to Harvard, or you think you have to go to, you have to be part of a country club. But I've seen, people that come from the military. I mean, there was a guy that I met, over the holidays. This person was a retired Marine, and now he manages a couple billion of assets, as an RIA, right? And I think if you can figure out what you enjoy doing, what you are good at, like, kind of like how you found, I think that's a godsend, right? So you talked about the quarter life crisis. There's a whole group of people that are kind of in the midlife crisis, right? They're in their late 50s. They are looking to kind of make a change. They have maybe 80% of the skills, but there's maybe a 20% skill gap to maybe switch from private equity to venture, or vice versa. So, tell me a little bit about the people that you've helped that are kind of a bit older, and they feel that they're aged out. How are they kind of rethinking their career, and what's some guidance that you give to them?
It's an interesting question. I'm not saying this is a one size fits all, but the thing is you got to come back to like the core of like what speaks to people in general, right? There are core principles and values that most people will agree on in terms of what is like what kind of charisma somebody has, like why are we drawn to that person? There are these intangibles that occur, right? And you can toss out the I think the common denominators of like, all right, someone who's authentic, someone who's real, someone who's like resilient and gritty, someone who's tenacious, someone who is hardworking, right? These are all things that have to be demonstrated, right?
Yeah.
Now,
what's kind of a common thread that you've seen with people that get placed, right? You've got a hiring manager. You obviously you're actively working on placements. So what's kind of that common thread, maybe on the soft skills and also on the hard skills?
That's a good question. So here's the thing. The first thing that's going to happen is like, are they qualified? Do they have the technical skills to get to the person that they're interviewing with, right? That's going to be necessary, right? You can be like, all these other soft, like these intangibles have those, but if you can't do the job, you're not, you can't.
And let's walk through some of those, right? So for private equity, I'm assuming it's just showcasing your ability to source and screen deals, probably going through a couple, walk me through the interview process now, right? Is it 2-3 rounds, and is there like a case study at the end?
Oh man, it just depends. Like, I mean, you have, and to be quite honest, like I don't work with the big boys because of the fact that their process is like 6 months long.
Sure.
I don't,
And a lot of times they have like 20 different recruiters, and a lot of times they prefer to just, have people just sign up on the website. I interviewed at Goldman, and it was like 25 rounds of interviews, essentially,
yeah,
right? I was there like 3-4 times. After a while, I was like tired of going there because it was just like,
big private equity reminds me a lot of big law. And I've recruited in big law, and the reason I stopped recruiting as much in big law was for you said something very poignant, which was having so many different recruiters working on the same job. And just not to go into the weeds about that, but just as an example, like big law, one of the things that turned me off is like you have to like sign up to their portal, you have to sign their agreement. There's no negotiations in good faith of like, no, it's got to be this way or highway kind of thing. There's none of that stuff, right? And so really what I found myself is I found myself not liking working with them or working in the industry because of how I was being treated. Like I'm just a number. And if they're doing that with me, that's indicative of how they're treating their candidates. Now I can't do big law. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Yale or anything like that. So they treat those candidates a little bit slightly better because they're wanted. It's the most elitist, one of the most elitist industries I've ever worked in. Private equity, at least the big side, like tends to be that way. It's not as prevalent, but that being said, the same and ironically, big law will move if it's like a pinpointed right candidate. Like they will move, but all that time that it takes to get to that point, I mean, it's a long time. And then versus private equity, big private equity, they are, like you said, it's 20 interviews plus, it's 6 months long, 4 months, and then you get to the point where like, oh yeah, you're down to last 2 candidates, 3 candidates, and you don't get selected, and then you're like, what? And so, and I understand that whole like emotional process because it takes me back to like when I was applying for the LAPD. It was a 4-month process. It was like do this, like get this interview, like that kind of thing. And I asked myself on behalf of the candidates, like, do you really have time to do all of that, to be wholly invested in that? And on the flip side of that, here's the thing, in terms of getting to your question about like what the processes are, I work with the firms that are going to be less bureaucratic, that are going to be more decisive, that are going to be, yes, they're going to have prestige. Yes, they want similar things, but they're not going to be at the same scale as like Blackstone or BlackRock or et cetera, right? They're not. They're just not. And so, and that's okay, because as it's like it's as Malcolm Gladwell said, in one of his books, The Tipping Point, or maybe it's Outliers, I forget which one. But he said you got to ask yourself, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond, or a small fish in a big pond? Like, do you want, like, which one do you prefer? And I myself, by like evidence of going to Loyola, which is a small school in New Orleans, NYU, which is not that big of a school. I mean, it is what it is, but like I like being a big fish in a small pond. I like being able to affect and have influence, and the advice I literally get paid for giving advice, Joel. Like, sure. That's like, who can say that? My kids are like, what do you mean, Dad? Like, and it's just like, if I'm going to give advice, it's about like, is it going to be well-founded? Is it going to make it better for you? Like, I don't do it just to do it. Sure. In terms of the processes, so I mean, in terms of the smaller firms, they're more agile. So I mean, yes, they'll do the case study. Yes, they'll do interview with the founder, with the team. They'll do a case study in between. They might do a task, that kind of thing. Like, but eventually it's not as long. You're looking at probably like maybe a 4-week turnaround.
So when you say an interview with the founder and the team, so like let's say you're a candidate. You've built some skills and you're applying to the role. You've kind of gotten some chops in terms of sourcing deals, bringing in your own deals, right? So when you say interview with the team, are you saying a portfolio? Is this a portfolio company of a private equity firm, and then you're having the potential candidate kind of talk to one of their portfolio companies?
No, that's
or the founder of the private equity firm.
I'm talking about the founder of private equity firm,
okay,
or on the venture side, it's typically more the founder of the venture capital side. So I found myself working with the heads of VCs
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, as I work with them, then they say, "Hey, Dave, can you help our portfolio company kind of thing out?"
Yeah.
Like that's how it's always started.
Yeah.
Or I'll get referred to another one or that kind of thing, and that's how it evolves for me.
Yeah, because they have a role. I don't know if you've looked at this role, but like we've been getting a lot of interest in the operating partner role. So essentially, you're kind of this. You're kind of like a jack of all trades, right? You're coming into a private equity firm. The private equity firm has several companies that they're actively supporting, right? I mean, when you think about private equity, it's majority ownership, so they have an active seat at the table. That's why they own 80% of the company,
Right.
and they just don't have the bandwidth, right? The GP at a private equity firm, if you think about a firm like Thoma Bravo, right, their whole focus is gathering assets. So they don't have the bandwidth to go out and support the go-to-market strategy of every single portfolio company. So they've looked at this role, and I've seen a lot more interest in this space in terms of someone who's got maybe digital transformation experience, someone who's scaled companies, someone who's worked on several operating teams to come in and, they kind of have an investor lens, but they also come in and they're kind of overseeing this portfolio more on the fulfillment and operating strategic lens, but they're also kind of on the investment team, right? Because they're looking at the numbers and making sure that when you report these numbers to the LPs, it kind of makes sense, and it ties into the operating strategy. But like I would assume that role, part of the interview process, look, you interview with the GP at the private equity fund to kind of make sure that you have the investment chops and you know what you're talking about. But then it may be good to get feedback from some of their operating companies, because those people may be working with that person down
Correct.
the line, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, so if it's an operating partner for the portfolio company, it's going to be a different process. Yes, they'll probably get brought in by the PE firm, as an by way of introduction. But but the PE firm is going to like a lot. They're going to say, "Hey, that's in their purview." They're going to decide if they want that operating partner or not, and with them, it's going to be a different process in that regard. I was talking more specifically in relation to direct with PEs or with VCs.
With the GPs. Yeah. So can you talk through maybe the delineation or maybe the differentiation with the, from a candidate standpoint, they're coming in, they're working with you, that journey for like maybe VC, and then maybe the slight difference for private equity in terms of like the hiring process. I'm assuming it's a little more technical on the private equity side versus VC, I'm assuming, right?
It can be, but I would say that I've worked with VCs where they do similar things to PEs, where they here's a case study, and then they have the candidate present. So I mean, it's pretty similar. I mean, there's going to be like, it's going to be on the VC side, it's going to be more towards like, I think, diligence of the actual investment of the company kind of thing, versus the sourcing transaction of a deal. Like it's going to be different in terms of M&A skills versus the VC side. That kind of thing.
Yeah, what people don't understand too all the time is, VC in my personal opinion is still part of private equity, right? Everything is still private equity, and then under private equity, even if you're an allocator, you have a certain mandate to private equity, right? And then under private equity, if you're allocating to private equity, that breaks out specifically into early stage venture. Then there's growth equity, but growth equity is still a blurred line between late stage venture, and it could be a blend of private equity, right? Some of the late stage investing is a hybrid of debt and equity investing, and then buyout. In my mind, a lot of people assume, buyout is private equity, but all of this is still private markets. So I think to your point, it's the same thing. It's really the attitude, the grit, and like maybe just the cohesiveness that you have with the team, the vibe that you have. And then I think on the technical side, you're looking at some of the different financial models and case studies that are kind of relevant to their stage and focus area, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you're right. I mean, and that's a very good point. Like, I kind of look at it as like all private markets, right? It's really just,
so you look at it the same way.
Yeah, and you kind of like, but people have different ideas of what PE is versus VC, and you're right. When you break it down in terms of the early stage or pre-seed, early stage, and then you have the Series A, B, C, right? I think the delineation that I tend to make in my mind is like, okay, here are the companies VCs are really looking at it, trying to get unicorns, right? To eventually go through the process of getting an IPO. Whereas I think of PE of more like, they're buying up like, professional services firms, accounting firms, and they're trying to spin them off and make money off. Like they're already producing assets, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so you have, and not that VC aren't investing in operating assets, that you see Series A, B, C companies they're operating. It's just a different mentality, like in terms of what people think of PE being versus VC, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, we've had hundreds of general partners at private equity and venture funds on our podcast. So they always give their own 2 cents of what they look for in terms of the hard and soft skills. But it's really interesting to hear your perspective, right? As kind of the gatekeeper, what are some of your specific filtering criteria? Because you probably get a lot of inbound from both sides of the market, right? There's people that are looking for talent, and then there's people that are looking for obviously their next career move. So maybe talk through that, like in terms of, from the candidate side, when you get a bunch of inbound, what are the things that you look for, maybe soft skills and technical skills?
Well, I'll start. Here's what I'll start with this in terms of working with me. So it's all comes back to process for me. And what I mean by that is there's a way that I work specifically because I know how this is going to go. I know the patterns of behavior in this iteration that occurs, right? And so for me, it's going to be, I'm going to pick up whether the person that I'm talking to is coachable. Will they work my process? Will they, and this is really from the time that I'm trying to set up a call with them, right, to the time that I'm preparing them for an interview, right, or suggesting that I prep them for an interview. And the ones that are receptive to really being coached and listen to the process that I have and really be humble enough to be like, even though they're high level executives, if they're like, oh, this is great, Dave, that kind of thing, or sometimes like, yeah, this is good, but they are, even those high level executives are willing, the ones that are willing to listen and be coached and take it as, maybe they already have some of those tools in their tool adjust.
Yeah.
But they're willing to accept it, right?
Yeah.
Versus the ones that are kind of smug and like, yeah, okay, whatever, and then they kind of want to get off, right?
Some of them have an ego and they're just like, okay, David, well, just get me the job, hook me,
exactly.
Connect me with a person. What's some of the typical, maybe just some blind examples? What's some general pieces of feedback that you've given, just so we can think about that too? That you've given to kind of help people? Like what are some of the things? Like, is it kind of to make a bunch of revisions on the resume? Is it to kind of prepare for things mentally?
I mean, sometimes the resume needs revision and we go through it. I've had a really good candidate who worked through it. And I even, in this day and age, I'm not ashamed to say it, but like I said, hey, use ChatGPT, man, get ChatGPT, so you don't have to like spend, but like see if you can tweak it here and there. And he was receptive to that. There's been in other cases I've had the complete opposite, where I had a candidate who was really obtuse, and I was like, hey, when are you available this week before you interview for me to do an interview prep? He's like, interview prep? Why do I need that? He's like, I'll just talk. I got it, Dave. I'm like,
he's just like line me up with the meetings.
Yeah. And then the day of, this candidate, is an example of who I don't want to work with ever. Is the day of, he'd already been sent the information for the interview, for the Zoom call, etc. And on the day of, a couple hours before, he's like, hey, can you resend me an invite? I can't find it, or I don't have it, or it's just the lack of preparation, the lack of willing to prepare, the lack of, I had to twist his arm to do an after debrief, and then even then with the debrief that I had, not to rag on this guy, but this is a prime example of someone that really, didn't move forward because the CEO picked up on, and I called the CEO and I specifically called him, said, hey, look, I'm so sorry. Like, you need to pass on this guy. Like, even before he told me, he's like, Dave, I'm passing. Like, I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm withdrawing him from consideration. Like, he's not, like, do not waste any more time on him. But that was really, I gave him a chance on the debrief to move forward, to like get his interest, garner that. And he was really tight-lipped about just his feedback, was really inauthentic, unwilling to do that. And so on the flip side, for clients, again, I work a certain way. I charge what I charge. my time is worth just as much as theirs. I have a value that I propose and that I can offer.
Yeah.
And you're either going to partner up with me because you see that and you
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that, or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't, hey, good luck to you. You know, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm unapologetic about that because I know what I'm worth. And so going back to candidates, they sometimes are overly humble and don't know what they're worth, or they do, but they're unwilling to brag about themselves.
Yeah.
So
It's two sides of this spectrum, right? You got, I mean, look, I mean, unfortunately, you need to have kind of the ability to be confident. You know, that's, I've revised what the formula for success is like almost every year, right? And I used to always just say sales is everything, right? Oh, you got to be able to sell yourself, sell your skills. But, you know, if you really tweak that a little bit, it is the confidence. Like, you know, if you can't believe in yourself, then nobody else can really believe that you're the right candidate either, right? If you have, because people can smell the insecurity.
And to that point, Joe, like I'm gonna tweak what you're saying is like I'm not saying I wouldn't disagree with you that sales is everything,
Mm-hmm.
but here's the thing: what is sales, right?
Yeah.
If you ask someone what sales is, you might get different. Someone who doesn't sell, you might get a different answer than my definition.
Yeah.
And my definition is very simple. Sales is the ability and willingness to understand what the other person wants and giving it to them.
Sure.
That's what sales is to me. So basically, what does that really mean if you break it down? You have to understand what the need and the problem is, and then you got to have the ability and the resolve to say and the confidence to say, I can solve that for you. And here's how, and here's why. Yeah. And here's how I can do it for you. Right. And that to me is what ultimately becomes the value proposition in terms of the candidate selling themselves in the interview. Right. So you're right. I mean, it is confidence, but and if you think about what the word confidence is, right, it comes from Latin, with faith, right? There's faith, right? It's, you know, and that's a slippery like word in terms of what it actually means, right?
Sure.
It's you know, I always think about the last scene of the third Indiana Jones, you know, where he's you know, he's got that giant chasm, right? And he's got to just take a leap, literally a leap of faith onto the invisible plank, and then he throws his sand.
I remember that.
You remember that?
It's Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah. It's yes. Yeah. And so I always use that as an analogy of like you gotta have that leap. You gotta do it. And so anyways, so that's that in terms of, you know, those two sides of it. Like the candidates who succeed are the ones who prepare, who understand what the needs are and the problem is in terms of what the company needs to be done in their role. And then they understand how their offering, how their value is going to be of substance to my client, to the company. Yeah. Right? And then the ability to make that value proposition really concrete is going to be crucial.
Sure.
And then on the flip side, you know, in terms of clients, you know, I always say, look, I ask them the question, like, what does success look like for this person? Sure. What are the expectations? What do they got to do in 6 months? Like if you fast forward a year and we're giving them a great review, what does that entail? Yeah. And those kind of questions like gets them thinking. And this is the beginning of the search when I'm contemplating taking on the search with them. And sometimes you'd be surprised they don't know. Right. Yeah. And I say, well, look, if you don't know, how is the candidate going to know? And how am I going to help you sell this? Because anyone who's good enough to do this job is going to want to know that.
Absolutely. What are some things that people should prepare for in terms of the interview and also just mentally before, you know, the first round, the second round? How, you know, with these firms that you work with, how many rounds normally is it? My experience based on, you know, kind of the hiring managers that have kind of come through our platform. I mean, it's usually sometimes like 3 to 4 rounds. It's like the first round, it's kind of like informational. It's like HR. It's like, hey, tell me what you're doing. Give me what your salary range is. And then it's kind of like 1 or 2 people on the team. And then it's kind of like a case study. And then sometimes it's like a presentation with like a deal and then like a spreadsheet or they give you some type of case study.
I would say a lot of the companies I work with do not have HR. So I'm working with smaller companies. And And so really, I would say I'd say 3 to 4 rounds is still probably, the way it goes. It's usually probably with the hiring authority, like the person is going to this person will directly work with.
Yeah.
Thereafter, it'll probably be with some teammates or peers that this person will work with, and then finally, it'll probably be with the CEO. In between there might be like a case study for them to prepare, and then have that be part of the presentation with the team or with the CEO with the panel kind of thing. It just varies based on company to company and the role. So
sure.
But in terms of like preparing, I would say, my prep is I treat, and my analogy with every candidate when preparing them is, this is like a date. Okay. Nobody, like, I don't know about you, my dad didn't really teach me how to date. Now, maybe it was my fault because I wasn't receptive, and just like my kids don't think I ever dated anyone besides my wife. So maybe that's the case. But the point is that this is like going on a date, right?
Sure.
And there are things that you do and things that you don't do on a date. And,
well, I mean, you don't talk about if God forbid, if everybody has a past, but if you had a really toxic relationship, that's probably not your opener, right? When
no, I mean, that goes to motivation of the candidate. Like my clients always ask, why is this person willing to move or willing to make a move? And so and I come with the truth, but a lot of times with candidates, before I present them or go forward with them, I'm trying to understand, are they running away from something and desperate, or are they running to something?
Sure.
Right. And there's a big difference, right? And,
absolutely.
And so now that being said, in this job dating world, right? I'll generally speaking, there are 5 main motivations that people make change. And I use an acronym. It's called CLAMS: challenge, location, advancement, money, stability. And I can break it down further if you want. But really, what I'm listening to is in my interview or my screening of a candidate is I'm listening to, like, what is it that's missing for them? What are they not getting where they are? In some cases they're getting everything. They're really passive, and and they're like, oh, I got a really good day here. Okay, well, I'm not trying to pry you out of it. It's like, well, this could be. I'm like, so when I ask them the magic wand question, what would you change about your? Then they start to open up. We have a conversation. Right. And then that's what we lead with the client, because that's what's missing. Now, I think that once that's divulged, then going back to the sales point, right, then I can sell my client if they can match and they can solve this missing piece for them in their career path.
Sure.
Right. And then that's how that occurs.
Out of those 5, what's kind of the biggest one that you see as a trend, out of challenge, location, advancement, money, and stability?
I would say that it would be a combination of, it just depends on the market, but sometimes stability lends towards like, hey, they don't have faith in the company going in a certain direction. It's not like, they see layoffs coming, like for instance, Meta cutting, 15% of the workforce. Oh, they might be right. So, but that's hard to say. I would say that it's a combination of like advancement, challenge, stability, right? Sometimes now advancement it speaks to, or is it too flat for them to move up? Is their boss too young for them to retire out? Like, is it, in terms of moving up, are they, and then an advancement kind of like they, again, coincide with challenge, because if they're stagnant, they're unchallenged, right? So again, they're looking for more, which kind of goes in with advancement. They kind of go intertwined. Sure. And that's the I guess the art of pulling that out, so to speak.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, there's a real interesting point where people, they just, they've been at a firm for like maybe 4 or 5 years, and there isn't probably a risk of losing your job, but the bigger risk is just becoming stagnant and not growing and becoming the next version of who you want to be. Right. And I think that's it's not like an urgent matter, right? It's more proactive, and it's interesting to meet people that kind of think that way and think growth minded, that want to really just make sure they're on the right path. And there was something that I saw in my feed that I resonated with, really. I mean, when you think about life and when you think about your career, your ladder is leaned up against a tree, and that tree is a different height, right? So that height could be worth 250 grand, or it could be worth, maybe close to $1 million if it's a little more entrepreneurial. But like that ladder that you lay your tree on, that you're kind of on that tree, and that's kind of the maximum height that tree would go on. So, you could either stay on that tree and kind of just accept that that's the tallest that you're going to climb, or maybe just kind of swivel like the ladder around and find another tree that has the same roots that you have, but maybe there's a path to kind of climb a bit higher. But like, a lot of people have said this, money isn't everything. It's kind of the combination of everything, right? Having good culture, good people that you're working with, that makes a huge difference. It's really interesting to kind of think through that, the culture and it's making sure you're around good people that are going to set you up for success.
Well, and I'll add to that, or I'll kind of like, so career satisfaction, what I found is that it lends towards three main aspects, or three attributes that people ultimately are seeking or feeling, right? And that's mastery. Are they really good at what they do, right? Are they do they feel confident in that? They feel like they can do it. Well, there's autonomy, right? Are they trusted to do what they're supposed to do? Are they trusted, or do they have influence? Or they believe? Are they are they empowered, right? And the last one is meaning, right? And it goes back to the people they're working with. Obviously, that's part of it. Like what they're doing, right? The mission, right? A lot of the current generation is more mission driven. Like, what is it doing in terms of that? But really, again, it comes back to do they believe what they're doing matters, right? Sure. And so all those things, you combine those kind of attributes, that so to speak, or qualities of a career into the motivations, right? And at some point, they all intersect. They kind of intertwine. And when you break it down in terms of I guess these 8 qualities, whatever you want to call them, it makes sense, right? It just and when I break it down that way, people are like, oh, okay, and so you start thinking about different structure. And one of the pivotal questions I ask is okay, what are your short-term goals? And what are your midterm? What are your long-term, right? And sometimes people haven't thought about that, because sometimes these candidates are as young as 28, they're 35, they're 40, right? And, it just depends on the duration of their life. Depends where they are with their family, with the family life, and then personal and career, they intertwine. They really intersect, and they really influence each other as well.
So this is something that I still resonate with. I mean, look, I change careers every 2 to 3 years, and that was the only way for me to get a higher title and a higher, pay, right? I would parlay my past experience and negotiate and ask for a lot more money. And I used my skills of kind of what you said, look, thinking about what they're looking for. And I would spend a lot of time tailoring my talents to kind of fit into kind of what they're looking for. So it's much more personalized. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's still relevant? There was a survey that, from maybe 4 or 5 years ago that actually looked at the data, and there's people that have stayed at companies for 10 years, especially when you think about these companies that are in Georgia or Iowa, right? Those companies, that's the only company that the entire city works for, right? So they have to work there, and essentially the entire city works at that big, huge, Caterpillar plant or massive media company, right? So Walmart, exactly, in Arkansas. So those people, they've stayed at that firm for 10, 15 years. And if you've left, God forbid, you have the scarlet letter on your chest because you're unstable, right? But then they looked at the data, and there was a bunch of Gen Zs and even millennials that have kind of climbed up and made a lot more money. And they did a analysis, and there was a huge loss in financial growth and wealth from staying at a company, right? So what's your opinion and your view with just looking at a lot of these candidates and also looking at the hiring manager's perspective of job hoppers? Is 2 years, normal? Is it a red flag if somebody leaves in a year or 9 months? Tell me about that.
Job hoppers, it is. So it's an interesting question, because yes, the short answer is clients always saying, I don't want a job hopper. I don't want someone who's, going from that kind of thing. I want someone who's stable. And so really, you know, when you ask them to define that, they're like, I don't know, they, you know, and so what I'll say to that is the rule of thumb is no more than 3 jobs in 10 years.
Okay, that's not bad.
Right. So if you think about it, that's 3 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? You know,
Got
or
it.
4, 4, 2, whatever you want to say, how you want to cut it. Right. So ideally, that's the way that I would see it. Now, that being said, right, it you know,
3 years is still a long time, though. But you're kind of saying, just kind of from the lens of the recruiter, they're like, hey, wait a minute, this person was here for a year and a half and he moved like 3 times, essentially, right? Because what they're thinking is they want continuity as well, right?
It also depends on the path of the you know, it just depends. And I'll caveat it with this: I've worked in different industries, right? And so it just depends on. It kind of depends on the industry as well. For instance, law, it's not as uncommon to like jump from law firm to law firm per se.
Yeah.
It's you know they'll start kind of, you know, looking at why this person, you know, going, you know, but that's not as uncommon. And then the other thing is if the story tells, right? If there's an authenticity in the story, and this is, I always start with my candidates with their story. Like they always want to know what I'm working on, what I have, what my client, you know, that kind of stuff. And I say, look, I'll get to that, but just tell me your story. Like, I think it's incredible power of what your story is and what it's been. And I'd like to understand that first before I can help you. You know, I'd like to understand your story, how you got to where you are, your progressions, why you made your moves. And then I want to understand what are the needs and wants, you know, for the reason why we're talking. And then if the clients I have match up, we can discuss. If not, I'll leverage your time and I'll say, I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
But at least you know.
What's a good template for storytelling? Like, how many minutes? What are, you know, do you talk about your career path, you know, I guess where you lived, I guess what should you say and what shouldn't you say, and how many minutes long should it be?
That's a good question. I would say it's got to be compelling and it's got to be engaging. So, I mean, I think, but on the basics of it, you have to be able to tell a story where you have a beginning, middle, and end, and from there you have to understand transitions.
Yeah.
You know, I was here. This is why I did here, and you have to like take the person through the story of like how you started, why you started, and then the reasons that you decided. All right, this is why I pivoted over here. This is why I pivoted here, and it has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, or if it's not logical or pragmatic, then, or if it's not relatable, then it's going to be hard to, lack of a better word, sell that story. Right?
Sure.
It's got to be like, you know, there's like, you go back to, you know, there are times like when I was working in oil and gas, right? They were laid off, you know, they're in 2012, 11, like 07 to 12, right? You have a time when gas was like volatile, oil and gas was volatile. So when I got into it in 13, the 7 to 10 year person was really like, it was hard to find that person because a lot of them got laid off. They weren't around.
Yeah.
Right. And so when there's a gap, right, in that time frame, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. You see what I'm saying? So like, it's not always, so there's that goes back, that goes to like, hey, what's, you know, the question of like, hey, what about being laid off? What does that look like? That kind of stuff. It always just depends on, does it make sense?
I think it's also important, you know, how people position why they're looking for a change as well, right? That's probably going to be the first question. What I've seen is people that kind of smoothly position why they're leaving and what their motivations are. A lot of times it's, you know, if you can mention, you know, that you're excited to kind of, you know, take the skills that you had previously and bring that to a new organization. It's kind of a little more assumptive to kind of just, you know, get a preview of what that person would look like working for your firm, right? So, but you know, again, in your opinion, are there any pieces of recommendation that you'd share in terms of like how people handle that question and what they shouldn't say? Kind of like dating, right? You don't want to mention all of your red flags right on the first call. You don't have to overshare, but you know, trying to position it in the right way.
Well, yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's the truth. How you disseminate or like the truth is really up to the person. I mean, I can coach the person. A lot of times I will tell their story, or I will kind of guide them through, and they're like, wow, Dave, how do you know? I'm like, this is just off the cuff. I haven't prepared anything. So you're going to prepare. It's going to be way better from you.
Yeah.
But really it's like, again, it goes back to the adage of like, they're running to versus running away. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a good point.
Spin or the framing of that is very paramount.
And I'd say the hiring manager wants somebody that is running to something versus just because they may just be worried that that the same thing may happen to you, right? And like maybe 9 months, like, oh, you know what? Like they're probably going to do the same thing in my firm. They're going to just run away and find something else.
That's a very natural inclination.
Yeah.
And you want to assuage at the same time. So really, and also like the running away from it tends to be like desperation, right? And so so desperation is sensed. Like we can sense it, and we are repulsed by it for the most part. Nobody wants a desperate person, and so so when you're like, hey, you know, I wasn't looking when Dave called. You know, he told me about the opportunity, and I couldn't say no to it. You know, really, this is what's missing in my career right now, my job. This is what, you know, what he told me that you guys are doing is really exciting, and what I believe this, you know, in terms of advancing or whatever. Again, it goes back to these motivations, right? Kind of framing it. Yeah. And then that's going to speak to the hiring authority, right? And that's going to be, again, it's going to be a fit of like, you know, what they want and the person, and then, you know, what this candidate wants in a client or a company to go to.
Yeah. Well, we got about 4 minutes left. So just going to the other side, you know, what are some best practices for, you know, hiring managers and, you know, GPs to work with you? Because we have a huge community of fund managers. Some of them are emerging fund managers too. They're looking to kind of bring on talent. So what are some things that they should be prepared for? Obviously they need a job description. You know, it's crazy, man. I mean, back in the day, I would just see like spelling errors on job descriptions. And sometimes you feel like somebody just copied somebody else's job description and just posted it, right? For like an analyst or principal role. But what are just kind of the things that you're seeing on the hiring manager side, and what do they need to make sure they do so they're successful as well?
Well, so they're two sides of the same coin, really, right? So the same things that I would tell a candidate are you know, to a GP or to a client is like, look, what makes you different? Why? Like my question to you is like, why should someone quit their job and come work for you? Yeah. And they start talking about the firm and this. No. Why should someone quit their job and come work for you, Joel? Like, people don't work for companies; they work for people. Yeah. Right. And so then they're like, oh, okay. So really, it's about like, all right, who are they as a manager? Who are they as like a people leader? Who are they as a visionary, right? These have to come out some kind of way in their marketing of the firm, of themselves, that kind of thing. So in the job description, I always encourage like, hey, you can put down the qualifications and the responsibilities of what you're looking for in a profile, but nowhere in here does it tell them why they should come work for you.
That's a good point. What's a good example? Like, do you have an example of someone that highlighted that well, or like maybe their story? And again, you don't have to name their names, but just kind of.
No, I actually do. I mean, I'm working with a VC in San Francisco who really took it to heart, and he has his pitch down. Like, so he's got the vision embedded. He knows this is why we want you to come work here. This is what you're going to do with us. Sure. And it goes back to Simon Sinek, right? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why would you want to do it with us? You know, what makes us different? And so that has to be written and disseminated in the job description. It comes back to accomplishments. What are we going to accomplish together? Like, they're not coming to work for you. They're trading time to be with you 8 hours a day. Why? Yeah. Well, this was amazing, David. We covered things that are spiritual, that are relationship based, you know, things that you need to think about from a professional standpoint and just preparation, right? So in this last minute, I just want you to share one piece of wisdom. Could be from a family member, could be from one of your mentors, could be from your clients, because we're always learning. So what do you got to leave with us? Oh, man. I'll leave you with the word grit and the way I define it. And it comes from a book by Duckworth. And she defined it as commitment, passion, perseverance. Right. And that's why I've always said I embody grit, because at the end of the day, like, you gotta or I'll piggyback off of FDR's Man in the Arena, right? Don't be afraid to be the person in the arena. Like, it's that person who's going to learn the most. Like, what are you going to get out of it by doing what you do? Right. It's the resilience that come with it. So, not to be tried, you know, but you got to keep going. You got to try. You got to be curious, and you got to not be afraid to fail and embrace failure, like, because that's when you learn the most.
Yeah. Well, hey, David, this is amazing. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all that you do. You're servicing so many different clients, and you're really creating true impact and helping people get jobs. You're helping teams essentially scale their business. So you're doing God's work. So appreciate all that you do, and thanks for your time and being generous with it.
No, thank you, man. Humbled to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
You
Bye.
too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.